Why do we constantly, check our phones and like wonder what they're doing, and why are we fantasizing about somebody? Or why are we struggling to feel loved? Why are we struggling to accept love? Why is that so difficult to, believe somebody when they say that they care? Attachment styles are very illuminating for so much.
Welcome to the Inspired to Thrive podcast. I'm your host, Phoebe, and in each episode, I will be sharing with you insights from either an inspiring person or myself to help you thrive and shine online and in person. We talk about all things marketing, relationships, money, business, growth, mindset, and more. So thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you inspired to thrive. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Inspired to Thrive and Shine podcast. I'm very excited about this conversation today because it's one that I have wanted to bring to this show for quite some time now. And it's going to be a conversation that not only am I eager to bring, but we are diving deep into a topic that quite literally shapes every single relationship that we have, whether it is romantic, friendships, family, even possibly how we show up in business. We are talking about attachment styles, and Lynn is a registered psychotherapist and couples therapist based in Calgary, specializing in attachment styles, relationship dynamics, and infidelity recovery. He has a master in counseling and he's a lifelong learner in the field of psychology. Marcus works with individuals and couples navigating the most difficult chapters of their relationships, bringing a trauma-informed lens to the conversations most people are too afraid to start. And not only that, Marcus helps people understand why they love what they do and what to do about it without shame or judgment. So his work sits at the intersection of clinical depth and a no BS approach to real talk about love, attachment, and the patterns that a lot of people can't seem to shake. Beyond the therapy room, Marcus is the voice behind the Realist Therapist, an online brand built on the belief that good mental health content doesn't have the watered down or the dressed up. And he's passionate about making attachment theory accessible to anyone serious about building healthier connections. Marcus, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much to have me. I am very privileged to be here.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to, I guess, diving into some conversations about attachment styles. We've talked so much about relationships already, but I would love to hear, why is attachment styles important for us to understand when we are navigating relationships? Maybe if you could start us off with also, like, what is the definition of an attachment style?
I think even just to start with like what is an attachment style. So when you boil it down, an attachment style or just attachment in general is an evolutionary survival mechanism. It's how we are wired and shaped to survive our environments and how to, thrive wherever we're at. So that looks like obviously different things in different spaces, which is where we get into the, compassionate approach where there really isn't necessarily a quote unquote bad attachment style, which I fully believe attachment styles are incredibly illuminating because it can really tell you not only who you are and not only how you see other people, but how you bridge that gap between you and somebody else. So it's incredibly predictive of how you navigate the world, the decisions you make, how you process emotions. And that really shapes fundamentally so much about your life. And we know from relationship science and research that your relationships are one of the strongest predictors of personal fulfillment, happiness, income, health. So when you look at attachment styles, it is incredibly illuminating to understand how you show up in relationships to try to make the happiest, most fulfilled life you can have.
Wow. What you just shared about the fact that it affects every other part of our lives, including our business, our income, like the quality of life, I fully resonate with that, because if we can't manage our own personal relationships or ourselves, our reactions and responses to things in the external world, it's very difficult to then be able to focus and, drive other parts of our lives. We tend to attract a lot of things that bring up unresolved things, whether it's trauma or lessons, life lessons that we haven't yet understood. And a lot of our relationships are really a mirror of our internal world.
Yeah, I would say everyone could benefit from attachment styles. And I'm obviously very biased because it's the backbone of my therapy practice. But It really is illuminating, and I find so many people enjoy learning more, understanding attachment styles because, like you said, it becomes a mirror and we can see ourselves more clearly when we have patterns or repeated pains and hurts that just keep coming up in our life. Attachment styles and attachment theory in general can really, really paint a clear picture of what's happening with us, what's happening in our emotions, our bodies that is leading to these outcomes that we don't want and that we might struggle with. Why do we do the things we do? Why do we constantly, check our phones and like wonder what they're doing and why are we fantasizing about somebody? Or why are we struggling to feel loved? Why are we struggling to accept love? Why is that so difficult to, believe somebody when they say that they care? Attachment styles are very illuminating for so much.
Is that something that people experience when they have more of an avoidant attachment style where it's harder for them to believe that somebody cares?
Yeah, I think that would definitely fit, but I don't think that's exclusive to avoidance, to be honest. Because with avoidance, yeah, I think a lot of times avoidants do struggle to accept love or believe love or even position themselves, for intimacy in relationships because there is a lot of times an experience of cynicism or pessimism towards other people, which like really encourages that avoidant person to kind of hold other people at arm's length and say, yeah, I don't necessarily believe you. I don't necessarily trust you. And so even though you're giving me devotion, compassion, and kindness, I don't know if it's reliable. I don't know if it's real. And so it can be really hard to receive. But at the same time, that's definitely not strictly, compartmentalized to avoidance. Anxious people as well can, want intimacy. They can really want a connection. They'll really desperately crave a relationship. And when that other person shows up and says, yes, I love you, or I want you, I choose you, they don't believe it because maybe they don't feel worthy. They don't feel that they're worth the love and compassion that they're craving. And so even though they want it, it also is met with disbelief, needing more reinsurance, needing more kind of like, confirmation that, it just never seems to be enough either.
Wow, that's so interesting. So run us through what's the definition of an avoidant and what's the definition of an anxious and what's secure attachment styles? What are the three? Do we have all three? Do we have one or the other? Do we have two of the three?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it concise because I could rant about this for a full hour in general. But again, so when we look at attachment styles, there's what's known as organized and disorganized. So secure, anxious, and avoidant are all organized, which basically means that they are evolutionary adaptive. These are the ones that help us. These are the ones that we're shaped by our environment that help us survive wherever we grow up or whatever experiences that we're having to manage our relationships and connections. And so secure relationships are, or actually, sorry, I'll say that with that, they're not categories. Attachment styles are not categories, and they never were meant to be so definitive in boxes that we put ourselves in. They're actually spectrums. And so where we fall on, an anxious spectrum or an avoidance spectrum is always going to be, somewhere, even in the most secure person. So every person, including highly secure people, will still have some behaviors of avoidance and some behaviors of anxiety. That's normal. That's very human. There's no escaping that. So the goal isn't to be quote unquote perfect because that's just not practical. Like we're humans and we're all going to have some of those kind of like insecurities. That's fine. So, but secure attachment overall is being able to value yourself and somebody else simultaneously to a high regard, which means that, when you have a feeling and there's a conflict with somebody you care about, it's, hey, I can value my opinion, I can value my perspective, but I can also value yours. I can value a contrary opinion or feeling, and I can hold space for both. And that really showcases that, yes, I matter, you matter, and, we're able to hold the tension in that gray area. Whereas with an anxious attachment, that usually comes about by inconsistent caregiving or inconsistent love. And so somebody learns that in order to get connection or the love that they need, they have to more or less amplify their distress. So in children, it looks like I need to cry more to get mom's attention because otherwise mom's not going to come to me. And so you get that sort of more expansive sense of self where somebody views their sense of self in tandem with other people, which is where that reassurance is needed because I need you to give me reassurance because it's almost like I'm getting a piece of me back every time you give it. On the flip side, avoidance is actually, I don't feel that I'm in an environment where my needs matter. I don't feel that, people care about my emotions. My emotions aren't actually changing my experience or the people around me to help me feel loved. I'm going to shut them off because they're not useful. And so it's this really strong detachment from emotions. And that's where you get really, hyper independent, very utilitarian, very like function based people. And that leads to high performance and like very driven business people, but it also really negatively impacts relationships because it becomes really difficult to have intimacy in that regard.
Wow. Thank you so much for breaking that down. I'd love to know, can someone feel really confident and secure in their lives? So, be a secure person like in work, in business, in friendships, they know who they are, but still have an insecure attachment style when it comes to dating. Is there a difference between someone being a secure person in general versus having a secure attachment style?
That breaks down kind of like what I really like to call out because I think a lot of people get confused of, well, I'm secure with my friends or I'm secure with my family, but then when I have this partner or I'm dating, then I'm like, I'm so insecure. And that's because all attachments are relationships, but not all relationships are attachments. And so you can be in the workplace and you can absolutely thrive and kick ass, but you're not exactly relying on your coworkers or your boss for a strong sense of security, belonging, significance, and connection. Whereas when you're dating, it's way more intimate, way more vulnerable. And so those attachment needs are going to be way more present in romantic relationships. So definitely people can have, you know, almost like that. I don't want to say facade because I don't think it's a facade, but you can definitely get by in a public setting or professional setting and appear kick ass on top of the world, so confident. But deep down, it's like, when it comes to your relationships and how you view your sense of self or how you think other people view you, you're just riddled with insecurity, lack of self confidence, or maybe pessimism about what other people think of you. It can, which is kind of where you get like that very kind of, hyper insecure performer of like, I never feel like I'm good enough. So I'm always striving, even though I'm, breaking records and hitting the highest benchmarks, it still doesn't fill that gap of, I still don't know if I'm worthy of love.
Wow. This is really, really deep. And thank you for sharing this because I feel like a lot of listeners right now are probably just even reflecting and thinking about a lot of relational patterns that they experience and maybe even reflecting about, their own attachment style. How did you get into this work? Was there like a moment or an experience that made you realize I'm pulled into attachment theory and I'm drawn into this work?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually was studying to go into business myself, and I wanted to go into, managing cultures and teams and, working on like how companies run their businesses as far as like a general culture. And as I actually got introduced into the field of psychology, I started doing some frontline work with at-risk youth and seeing trauma that up close in pretty intense and severe situations. I realized if I wanted to have the impact that I wanted to have of really helping people, personally for me, that's probably not gonna happen in a boardroom because there's so many limitations of what you can talk about and what's considered appropriate. And there was a big transition of if I wanna have this impact that I'm looking to have, then I need to go to the source, which a lot of times is the trauma work. And that gets into how were you raised? What did you learn to believe about yourself? What did you learn to believe about the world? And that working with kids opened my eyes and my knowledge to attachment styles and how our earliest experiences shape and form, again, how we move and navigate in the world. And that's been now my huge passion point of I want to help people step into their most healed self so they can have the most fulfilling relationships because that's what life is really all about.
Yeah, wow. So did that help you recognize in yourself like your own patterns as well and change the way you, I guess, view other people and how they form connections or if they lean more anxious, knowing how to respond to that?
Absolutely. 100%. I like to call myself a recovered avoidant. So for a vast like majority of my adult life, I would say I was more avoidant. And so I was very like, you know, hyper driven, hyper ambitious. I'm always the passionate one. And people would compliment me on, you're so smart. Like, you always seem to know what you're doing. You seem to be like the go-to person. And as nice as that was, I learned to function and how to do well in a world that felt cold, that felt dangerous, and it gave me a lot of accolades and praise. But I also realized like I was struggling in my relationships, that love didn't always feel real, that I had, my own walls up, that I would be with people who said that they cared about me and said that they loved me, but it never could penetrate, it could never feel real. And that led me to reflect and even like, going to therapy myself and recognizing like I logically know I have people around me who love me, but I still feel scared. And that was like my own alarm system kind of telling me, oh, I'm not in a dangerous environment, but my alarm system's going off, which means I can't fix myself. I can't think my way out of this. I need to go get help. And I had to go through my own process of going to therapy to have somebody kind of reflect back to me, doing that work of where did this, way of seeing myself in the world come from. And I very much use my own scalpel on my own self to help myself in my own relationships too.
I'm guessing therapy has not only transformed the way you connect with people. I hear so many people say that, I don't need therapy. That's for people that are, going through like really bad mental illness or trauma. And most people brush off therapy until it's too late. Sometimes people that have been to therapy want everyone to experience like how good it is on the other side. It can become also, something that people really rely on. It is so good when you can start to see the world differently and see yourself differently and be able to say that you're a recovering avoidant or a recovering perfectionist or a recovering whatever. When you discovered that you had an avoidant attachment style, was that label, like, was that confronting? What were your initial, I guess, challenges with that diagnosis? Or is that even a diagnosis?
Yeah, attachment insecurity isn't a diagnosis. It's more of just a concept to help people understand themselves. Like, you're not gonna find it in the DSM, and it's not gonna be, label that's, medically applied to you. I would say even in my own studies, I think that, but this might even be helpful for some of your viewers, but the difficult thing with avoidant attachment specifically is you don't know that you have it because you're so disconnected from emotions, and you're so disconnected from like, feelings, and you're so used to intellectualizing that you can't see a problem. You don't know there's a problem because you're so used to functioning. And it takes a lot of reflection and, awareness to recognize and ask the hard questions of why are my relationships going poor? Why you know, all the books that I'm reading don't seem to be helping. These things keep happening. And it takes a lot of work again to be able to recognize, where you're at. So I would say even with me, like I think I always knew I had an avoidant lean, but even to the extent of like how avoidant was really kind of hard to identify and took quite a bit of time because you don't always recognize and how big the walls are. And that's something I tell people and clients as well as avoidant attachment is I'm going to put up walls to feel safe. And so I'm going to stack bricks to keep all of the dangerous and bad things out. But you don't realize that after you build all of those things and you're so used to it, you put yourself in a prison, and it's really difficult to recognize the safety of isolation from the prison of being alone that you put yourself into. So avoidant attachment is pretty difficult to catch and to kind of call out because the person might not see it. And then it becomes a lot of work then to kind of help somebody like get there and understand it. And not everyone's ready for that because again, attachment is adaptive and sometimes we need that avoidance. Sometimes we do need it to feel safe and we do need it, which makes it really difficult to pull it away because if you take that away, it's like, hey, that's actually you're threatening me. That's dangerous. Like we're not cool anymore. Like I'm cutting you off.
Mm. Oh my gosh. I feel like there are so many anxious people that are probably listening to this right now and going, that person's avoidant. Oh my goodness, I was like so attached to that. He was avoidant. And labels, right? We all love to put labels on other people. It's so easy to see things in other people as opposed to ourselves. So I think definitely let's like bring it back to ourselves. How can someone that is witnessing that in another person show compassion, kindness, and understanding and not be put in a situation where they end up being pushed away?
That's a tough question because those are kind of at odds. Because I think when you ask that question of, well, how do I help maybe illuminate something to my partner without it hurting me? That's a bit of a double-edged sword because you can't always advocate for somebody else and try to support them and support yourself because maybe those needs are contradictory. Maybe that's not possible. And it's not to say that every anxious avoidant kind of couple is doomed, but I think a lot of anxious and avoidant couples, the reason why those relationships are so difficult and so climactic is because at the end of the day, it's in order to get my needs met, I'm going to sacrifice yours or vice versa. And that doesn't work. In any relationship, you have to have two people who are choosing to show up to support each other, to love each other, and have that mutual benefit. And with especially like highly insecure, anxious, avoidant couples, it's like that might not be possible because if your partner needs space to feel safe and you're like, I'm going to die if I don't feel close to you, it's like something needs to give. Something has to give. And if it doesn't, one of you will get hurt. And that might just mean the relationship's not feasible, or we have to figure out strategies to make sure that one of you's not, getting the short end of the stick and getting hurt.
Wow. That must be really tough as a therapist to navigate people through.
It definitely can be, and I think even in couples therapy, that's where a lot of couples get into gridlock conflict, right? Of it feels like your needs come at my expense, and that's why couples fight and kind of get really, stuck into these cycles is because they feel so threatened that they're not willing to let go of, their perspective or their experience because they feel if they let it go, then I'm just gonna get hurt or, my experience gets washed away and it's not important. And so that's where I get to come in as a third party and say, hey, both of you matter here. Both of your needs matter. Both of your experiences, are valid, but all of your feelings are valid for both of you. How do we hold space for both? And how do we actually, learn to bridge that gap where one person is not sacrificing and putting themselves on the altar to try to save the relationship because that's just not possible. And I tell people that all the time of if you're self-sacrificing in a relationship where you feel that you have to shrink or not get your needs met to make the relationship work, you don't have a relationship because relationships are about two people and shrinking by default makes it about one. So if we want to have a real fulfilling relationship, either we're both going to get our needs met or this isn't going to work.
Wow. Powerful. That's super powerful. If someone's listening to this podcast right now and they're single or they're seeing someone, it's very early stages, they are noticing this kind of conflict already. There's not a lot at stake. What would you advise them? Is this something that people should kind of avoid if they are finding that they're probably going to enter those kind of waters where they're highly anxious and the other person's potentially highly avoidant or vice versa?
I feel like this is a very therapist response, but I would say it depends.
Give us the non-therapist response. What would you say to a friend if it was like one of your really good friends and he or she is like, Marcus, I'm really into this guy or this girl, and there's so much chemistry, there's so much, like it's fireworks. But
Mm.
I constantly feel like they're gonna run away, or I constantly feel like I need more space and she's not giving me space. What would you say to that friend?
If it's a friend and I'm allowed to take sides and I'm not in the therapy room,
Yeah.
I would definitely say, "Hey, like, I care about you. I want you to be happy. Are you actually able to be happy with this person if you're not able to get your needs met?" And especially if it's just in the beginning, it's like, how practical is this relationship if you're already putting yourself on that altar to change who you are just to enjoy the ride? And it's like, by default, that ride is very time limited because either you're gonna get hurt or this is gonna blow up into, like, much bigger conflict. I guess I'd say that even too, like, not being able to help myself and putting the therapist hat back on,
Yep.
I also would have to say, like, "Hey, attachment styles are, again, relationally based, and they are survival mechanisms, and so they can be rewritten." And so if my friend was anxious or avoidant or whatever, or the other person is, it's saying, "Hey, are you willing to tolerate that? Can you endure that? And are you willing to walk through it with them to help that change?" Because by default, by the definition of like attachment styles being based on intimacy and relationships, if you can have a different experience that shows that your attachment insecurity behaviors are no longer necessary, then you can actually change and you can become this person can help you become more secure. And that can be a beautiful thing of, you're in a amazingly great relationship where you're growing together. And that becomes, super fulfilling and, this ride or die kind of mentality of like this person's my person because they really showed up in the way that I needed them to in a way that nobody ever has for me. And that can be incredibly powerful too.
Wow, that sounds like a dream for a lot of people. And I think that a lot of, especially women, and this might be biased, but I have spoken to a lot of women that think that they can fix somebody. And I have spoken to a lot of friends and guests and speakers, professionals, intelligent, smart, driven professional women that outside of, the entrepreneur hat, when that comes off, feel that they can fix somebody. And I recently had dinner with this beautiful lady who is a lot more mature than me in terms of like age and experiences, but also has shared that she knows that she is with an avoidant and that she's more anxiously attached, and shared that that's now like working out. And to me, I remember when I was having dinner with her and she said that, I was like, does that mean you fixed him? Like, are you trying to say that fixing is okay? Because in my world, I've learned that fixing is self sacrificing and it's just not cool. And I've had to learn intellectually to walk away from potential relationships, even if emotionally I don't want to. But now I'm hearing people share these things and what you said. So is that like you essentially saying that a secure person can help an anxious or an avoidant be more secure?
Yeah, most definitely. Like it's again, anxious attachment, avoidant attachment are ways to get our needs met when we have a certain understanding about ourselves in the world. And so when somebody else gives us love that we're not used to, that feels, incredibly powerful, or in therapy speak, it's called a corrective emotional experience of I'm having my emotional needs met in a way that's never been met before, which means my anxious attachment or my avoidant attachment actually doesn't feel necessary in this context. And that can do so much good to rewrite that person's internal script of how relationships work that can help that person become more secure.
Can you give us like an example of that?
I think even for example, so like the big caveat, knowing it seems like a lot of your listeners are probably more anxious and deal with a lot more of like avoidant partners. And so the example is like, my partner's avoidant, but not willing to talk to me. That really sucks. And it's so hurtful. And he says he wants to change, but he's not changing. And this hurts. This sucks. What do I do about that? One, again, recognizing that he's not anxious, and if you treat him like he's anxious, you're gonna hurt him, and that's gonna be viewed as a threat, and it's gonna get worse. So the first thing is like, hey, his avoidance and his emotional distance is not antagonism. It's not, him trying to hurt you. It's him trying to feel safe. So step number one is like actually being able to say, you know, I can actually see that you are different. You are not me. And then empathetically step into his shoes of, okay, if that's the case, if you operate fundamentally differently at an emotional level of how you view and approach relationships, what are you needing? Because somebody who's avoidant is very different than somebody who's anxious. It's fundamentally opposite. And so if they're needing space, they need to feel safe. It's like, cool. You know what? Actually, that really hurts, but I really value you. I want you to have that space. Can you let me know when we can talk again? So that way I just have an idea when you're going to come back. Because that gives an avoidant the ability to say, oh, I'm not being suffocated. You're not boxing me into a corner. You're not telling me what to do. You actually care about my autonomy and freedom. No one's done that before. No one's loved me and told me I'm allowed to take distance and still love me from afar. Maybe I don't need to withdraw. Maybe I don't need to pull away. Maybe I'll just go away for an hour and I'll come back. It doesn't need to be 2 days. And that becomes a new shift where, okay, if no one's encroaching on that person's autonomy, maybe they don't take distance and they learn how to persevere in conflict more.
So you would say that the needs of an avoidant is space and freedom, whereas the needs of an anxious person is more love and like reassurance?
Yeah, so when you look at avoidant attachment, again, because avoidant attachment is a response to I don't know if my feelings matter. I don't know if my needs matter to the people around me. So it's this shutting off of emotions, which then becomes this, again, hyper individualistic sort of utilitarian focus, which then becomes this need for control. I need to have a really, really big sense of self, which is where you get people who call avoidance narcissists, which is very inappropriate and not fitting, which is it's a need for control because when your needs don't matter to the people around you, you have to be an impossibly big and impossibly competent person because you can't deal with failure. Failure means a threat, and failure means that you're in danger. So you have to be on it and you have to figure it out because no one's coming to save you. That's kind of the internal feeling of an avoidant. So they need a lot of control. And as soon as somebody who's anxious starts impeding on that control, and avoidant is, big red flags, I'm out because that feels threatening. You're threatening my sense of self, and that's not okay. Whereas somebody who's anxious, I would say their need typically is for reassurance. It's, I see you as almost more important than myself a lot of times. And because I might not value myself, I don't have a strong sense of self. I don't have maybe as much self-esteem. I need that reassurance. I need you to tell me that you love me. I need to tell me that we're going to be okay. I need to know that this is going to work out. I need to know that you're not going to leave. I need to hear it a lot because I'm so nervous that if I don't cry, if I don't continually text you, then you're going to forget about me and then you might leave. And that's too much to handle. So I have to keep asking and asking and asking.
I think a lot of listeners will probably really resonate with this, but at what point does an anxious person need to step away, and how can they give themselves that reassurance? Because that's obviously something that would be quite exhausting for their partner, and especially if their partner is avoidant. How can they give themselves that reassurance? I mean, I know, like, for me, this has been years and years of work to get to where I am now, and I can share what I do, but what kind of tools do you give your clients in the therapy room?
I think it's a lot of times really just reshaping how they respond and approach stress and letting these clients know, hey, your feelings and your distress are enough to do something about it, even if nobody else recognizes it. You actually don't need another person to validate it. You feeling upset is enough. You matter enough that you deserve to take up space for that. And that can be enough for you. It's not going to fix everything. We still need people. We're always going to need people. We all every person needs reassurance, no matter how secure. We all want to feel loved. But at the end of the day, being able to try to shift it a bit where, hey, you feeling sad, you feeling disappointed, you feeling hurt, that is enough. You actually don't need your partner to validate that for that to matter. You're allowed to recognize that your pain matters to you and to really sit with that and kind of almost take pride and comfort in that of, yeah, I do matter within myself. I matter to me, and that's enough.
But, like, knowing that versus feeling that can be so difficult to, like, it's different because I think we can all walk around and be like, "I matter, I'm loved, God loves me, my friends love me, I have so many friends and family, da 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 da." But when that trigger, I mean, I'm just speaking from my own experience. When that trigger happens, it can feel so real, like, because your nervous system's spiraling. You're feeling like it's death. You
Yeah.
feel like you are the baby that's going to be left there forever until you starve and die of thirst.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know that we're now maybe getting into a bit of different forms of therapy, and I've lost the term, but there are obviously ways to soothe the nervous system, etc. But, is that a time where we should cradle ourselves, listen to certain music, breathe,
Yeah.
movement, dance, cry? Like, yeah, what would be like a physically tangible thing for people to do to recalibrate their nervous system?
Yeah, I love that you're bringing the nervous system to it, especially with anxious people, because I do, if I'm not mistaken, I do believe the research does show that people who have anxious attachment, they do have a more active amygdala and fear response in their brain. They do experience stress to a higher degree in their body. And so it does feel more intense. Like that's the whole nature of how these relationships wire our bodies and brains differently. And that can be incredibly debilitating and impactful. But yeah, like you're hitting the point of even if your nervous system is, hyperactive and it feels so intense, that doesn't change that. Yes, more or less, instead of reaching for this, I don't mean to belittle it by any means, but this external security blanket of another person that's going to bring me comfort, it's how do I respond to my own emotional dysregulation and my own nervous system in a way that regulates myself? Because in reality, you can regulate yourself. You're not like, and this is the difference between children and adults. With children, like, yes, they do need somebody to come and soothe them. Like, that's a need, and not having that is going to have very negative impacts. Whereas with adults and attachment, it's like, hey, you've never had this, but you are an adult. You can get this need met on your own. What does bring you comfort? What is going to make you feel okay? Whether that is music, whether that's a bath, whether that's journaling, whether it's self affirmations, like there's so many different things of like, there's not like a one size fits all by any mean, but it's, hey, really identifying what is your fear right now? What are you afraid of? What's really bothering you? And when you get clear on that unmet need, it's like, okay, and recognizing that instead of going to this other person to get that met and checking your phone and sending them 50 texts or calling them 20 times, it's like, if you're afraid of, I think they're going to forget about me. I think that they don't care about me. And I feel worthless. I feel unseen. What do I do with that? It's like, well, how do you make space to see yourself and know and really embody that, not just logically, as you said, but really physiologically, where you can actually nurture yourself in the way that you want somebody else to? Because again, that relationship with yourself is just as real as any relationship you have with somebody else. So, how are you responding to your nervous system in a way that allows you to calm yourself down and show yourself that you matter? And whether that's music, whether that's journaling, whether it's affirmations, truly like embodying those responses and taking care of yourself starts to, ease that stress and showcase that, yeah, I'm okay. And yes, it hurts. And yes, like this is so shitty and I don't like it, but I am okay. This whole thing can fall apart and that would suck, but I will be okay.
Yeah, I love that. Everything that you're sharing, those are experiences that I've seen has really helped people, especially when that internal dialogue changes. And I've also seen when people do share that they sent someone 50 texts or there's like lots and lots of missed calls. And I can imagine for an avoidant, that would be really full on and that would make them shut down. And it would feel like their world is kind of like their autonomy is being taken away and it's disrespectful. Going back to the question I was asking you was somatic exercises. That's what the word I was looking for. I guess the meaning of somatic is in the body, right? And when we go back to our bodies rather than our heads, is that where we feel more emotional or is that where we can release our emotions? And is that why somatic experiences are so helpful?
Yes. So yeah, I'm glad you're touching on this as well. Somatic work is really helpful with emotions because a lot of times we think that emotions are just in our head. I think I'm pissed off. I think I'm angry or I think I'm sad. What do I do about it? How do I fix it? And what people don't realize is that emotions, and especially when you break down like how emotions are made and constructed, it starts in the body. And I always give like this really cheesy example of like, if you have a fast heart rate, shallow breathing, and sweaty palms, and you're about to give a speech, you're nervous. Whereas if you have those same experiences, but you see somebody really attractive, you're kind of aroused, you're kind of horny, and like it's a different emotion with a different context. And so emotions are just context and physiological responses, and the emotion is the shorthand understanding of how am I interpreting this? And so when it comes to responding to emotions, it's being in your body, recognizing what is your body experiencing the situation as, and why is it experiencing it in that way? Why is it experiencing this lack of communication as anxiety inducing? What's the story behind that? What's the meaning behind that? And how have I learned to respond to that in my body? And a lot of times for anxious people, it's, well, I've learned to get more stressed to the point where other people start noticing, because if other people notice, then I'll get calmed down. And so it's learning to recognize that you can have that somatic experience, recognize what's going on in your body, and then doing that work with yourself of, oh, I can actually calm my body down. I can comfort my body and I can address these emotions. And so again, like, yeah, if you're, you know, shallow breathing and you're crying and you're so sad, it's like, yeah, grab a blanket, like hold yourself pretty tight, like listen to music, journal, and really be there for yourself in the same way that you would want somebody else to.
I think I may have already asked you this at the start, but can someone oscillate between being anxious and avoidant? Like being more anxious when they're with someone that's avoidant, but then more avoidant when someone is showing them love and they're not ready to feel love and to open their hearts to love. Can a person who is not the secure type oscillate between the two?
I would say it can shift, but attachment styles I think are a little bit more concrete than people think, in the sense that attachment styles again like really shape how we see ourselves and other people generally. It's kind of like how we define intimacy and relationships overall. And so it's not necessarily like changing from person to person. That's probably not attachment. There's probably other things at play there. However, at the same time, when you're in a relationship or you're dating somebody and it's becoming more serious, where you're dating for 3 to 6 months and, you're really inviting this person into your life, how they act might start shifting and changing your own attachment style because there's a bit of a counterbalance, right? Where it's like, oh, my partner is more avoidant. They are a bit more detached. They are a bit more ambitious and driven. And maybe I'm secure and it feels like I'm almost compelled to shift more anxious because if I don't let them know that I'm upset or I'm sad, maybe they won't call, maybe they won't text me. And so I'm getting used to, needing to voice my distress more in a way that's more anxious, and that can also happen vice versa. And that's why, romantic relationships really mimic our parental relationships is because the more intimacy, the more vulnerability, the more these like really deep internal scripts and, relationship models that we kind of have in our subconscious really start coming to light. But again, like if you're with somebody who is more anxious, more avoidant, or more secure, it can also shift based on the experiences that we're having, and it can start to get rewritten as we're having more intimate and vulnerable experiences.
Yes. Yeah, that's so true. And I think a lot of the time people keep attracting the same type of partners over and over again until they learn that. And yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes, they do. They very much do.
So going back to loving someone whose way of connecting feels completely different to their own and not constantly being triggered. Do you think that boundaries and protection is important? How can we have healthier boundaries and protection and move towards being more secure?
I think this is a bit of a hard question. If you don't mind, I'm like rant a little bit, just
Yeah.
because I think as we talk about self-help and attachment and good communication, all that kind of stuff, which it has its place. I'm all for it. And I do my therapy work to try to implement those things that can help people. But I also think there's a bit of a misconception that boundaries and good communication meaning I'm never gonna get hurt. And it's like that couldn't be that's the farthest thing from the truth. You can't have love, you can't have intimacy without vulnerability. And by definition, vulnerability means you are at risk of being hurt. And if you're in a long-term relationship, one that's meaningful and like incredibly fulfilling, you will be hurt at some point. It's impossible to avoid. And so, yeah, for sure, we can have boundaries to just make sure that we're protecting ourselves, that we're not making foolish decisions, that we're not attracting people who aren't good for us, all that kind of stuff. But there's also like, I think a bit of like this fallacy, especially in modern dating, where we think that the right person is just going to take care of me all the time. And it's like, you will be single forever if you think that love is painless, because it's not. You will be hurt. And I think that it's really unfortunate because as we try to insulate ourselves from pain, we actually start removing our willingness to find love because we're not willing to take that risk. And so we want all of the highs, all of the magic, but we're not willing to go in the valleys. And it's like, whether it's love or emotions, it's like I tell people like if you're gonna damp down like the ability to feel pain, you're damping down your ability to feel love. So like it's not about not feeling pain. It's not about trying to not have bad experiences. It's learning how to repair when they happen and learning how to fix things and address things as they come up to love well.
Oh my gosh, I so glad you touched on this and so passionate about this topic too, because I do think that unless we put ourselves out there to be vulnerable and to love and risk being hurt, we are not going to learn and we are not going to evolve. And, I think a lot of the time people sometimes stand back on the sidelines and they're like, why again? But it's like, if you don't allow yourself to feel love, to experience love, to be loved, and to love someone and risk being hurt, you're not going to evolve. And I think that's the beauty of relationships. It's that they aren't perfect, but they do allow us to evolve. And some people don't get married young because they are constantly learning. They're not just doing stupid things and choosing the wrong relationship purposefully. Like, I'm really passionate about the fact that we shouldn't judge other people based on the so-called failures of their relationships or the number of relationships that they've been through, because I really think that relationships teach us so much about ourselves. And I'm thankful for every person I've been in a relationship with, even if it was super toxic and narcissistic and just bad, just literally bad by the full definition of it. I still think that we can turn around and thank all of those relationships, because if we can learn from them, we can evolve, we can grow, and we can love better. And I mean, I haven't yet found that person, but I do think that maybe it is cliche that one day we will find that person where it's like, yeah, this is the happy medium and like the forever person. Don't know if that's cliche, but I do think that when I hear people say dogs are the best types of humans, or I'm not going to ever get married, I'm happy living in my own fortress or in my own like man cave. It's like, really? Do you really think that that is fulfillment? Like that you were created on this earth to not connect with someone so passionately and deeply that you feel safe and heard and seen? Yeah, that's where I get into my own rants. But, I truly believe that relationships are absolutely beautiful, no matter how short-lived they can be or how long they last. And people are in our lives to help us grow and evolve.
Yes, you're touching on such a powerful, powerful topic. And again, I fully agree where I think this might get me canceled. I don't have anything against pets or dogs or animals whatsoever, but I do think people are highly valuing animals and pets because they don't disappoint us. They don't hurt us. They're not gonna hold a conflict against us. There's no risk. And we want love. We want intimacy. We want connection without risk. And it's like that doesn't exist with another human being. Another human being who can challenge you, who can confront you, who can call you on your shit, who's going to reflect again our own shortcomings back to us. And there is like this huge fallacy that like if it's painful, it's not right. And it's like that could not be further from the truth. And I'm not a relational or emotional masochist. No, you shouldn't be in a relationship with somebody who's, abusive or doesn't care about you. Of course, that's not what I'm saying. But it is the recognition that if you want a pain-free life, you don't really want to live. That's not living. That's no different, ironically, than many of the avoidant kind of like approaches of, well, everything's so painful, I'm just gonna build this wall. And it's like, yeah, and you'll be alone. And you will not have the gratification of knowing what it's like to be enthralled with a beautiful, deep, fulfilling experience because you're so afraid of the depth and the pain that could happen in that depth that you'd rather just be numb. You'd rather just suffice with settling for, a quiet life. And I don't think there's anything wrong with a quiet life. I'm not going to tell anyone how to live, and everyone can live their own life. And I'm sure there's plenty of asexual people or whoever who, don't want a long-term relationship. That's fine. I have nothing against that. And I fully believe that exists. Cool. But I think for many people who want that depth, who want that intimacy, but it is the fear of, I'm not willing to go there anymore because I'm afraid of being hurt. And I think we're losing some of that resilience to be able to process through our pain, to actually address our hurts and then move on and not be so burdened down by it. And I also fully agree that if we're judging relationship success by longevity, there's plenty of people who've been married for 50 years and fucking hate each other. Like they're not happy. And the idea that, we were married for 20 years and we had 3 kids, we bought a house, and then we got divorced because we didn't want to have the same retirement. And that means it's a failure. It's like, what do you mean that's a failure? You raised 3 beautiful humans and you created so much beauty over the course of 2 decades. Why does that need to be a failure? Why can't that not just be love for a season and love for a time? And just because it ended doesn't mean it's not worth anything. That's so tragic to of a viewpoint to think of it that way.
100%. I could not agree more. And like going back to, what you were saying about people feeling comfortable in their solitude, in their solace and, being by themselves. I truly think that humans are made to connect. I think that every person deep down wants to connect. It's just that
Mm.
there's fear, there's risk, they're scared. I love what you mentioned. I love the word that you use, resilience. I think that we all need to build resilience towards getting hurt and recovering and getting rejected. Like an anxiously attached person is going to be very sensitive about being rejected, I think, especially if they've got things like ADHD and then there's that rejection sensitivity dysphoria. I think that we all risk pain when we put ourselves out there to love. And I really hope that for the listeners that this conversation has helped you to realize that the other person, whether they are the same as you or the complete opposite in terms of attachment styles, they are still feeling pain too. And just because they know how to shut you out doesn't mean that they're not feeling lonely, sad, disconnected, numb, painful, isolated, and we need to give more compassion to those people. And maybe compassion means loving them from a distance. Maybe it means not texting them and just giving them space and being like, yeah, okay. I mean, it might just be intellectualizing that they care about you. And yeah, that doesn't feel as good as feeling them love you and tell you that you matter and tell you that they care about you or that they think about you, and it's not the same, but maybe intellectualizing it is all we can do. And then we feel love in other places, in other ways, whether it's in nature, with our pets, through God, through music, somatic work. Yeah.
I like to share this definition because I feel like it really exemplifies what love looks like, which people talk about boundaries and setting boundaries against somebody. And I'm like, you don't set boundaries against somebody. If you're trying to set boundaries and control somebody else, that's manipulation, coercion. Like, that's not a boundary. Boundaries are for you. And so, boundaries are how you're able to love yourself, somebody else to the maximum capacity at the same time. And so sometimes that might require distance because loving somebody means hurting yourself if it's too intimate. And so sometimes the best thing you can give somebody is space. And at the same time, like I love that you talked about compassion as well, because again, attachment styles are these adaptive things. They help people survive. And it's how we learn to survive really difficult experiences at times. And so the idea that, oh, they're distant, they're avoidant, they're an asshole, they're hurting me. And it's like, what if they just can't? What if in the same way you can't stop checking your phone, you can't stop calling them, you can't stop texting them, you can't stop thinking about it, they just can't reach out. They just can't close that gap. That's no different. And they have needs that are just as real as yours. And I think that compassion to hold space and say, yeah, you're not me. You operate differently. That hurts sometimes, but I can also be okay with that. I can learn to hold space for that and empathize with that. And again, if you can't, maybe you need boundaries to create some space so that you can love that person and yourself to a better degree. But, again, that's not against them. That's not because they're a terrible person. That's just because you both deserve compassion to meet yourselves and give yourselves the love that you're needing.
Yeah. Thank you. That's so well said. I am so grateful for this conversation, Marcus. I feel like we could talk about this for so many hours, and I love the passion and the depth that you have to share with the listeners. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask, in terms of the work that you do and the way you empower people to have healthier relationships and have a more fulfilling experiences, is there hope for people that are feeling the devastation or the loss of that these kind of relationships are, I guess, bringing them? And yeah, what's like your final take? Or what's one piece of advice that you could give somebody who's listening, who's feeling either anxious and rejected or avoidant and isolated? What's something that, you could gift the listeners today?
I would say, like, I work with infidelity. Like, I work with some pretty extreme, deep betrayals, deep hurts. And so couples come in really desperate places and they don't know if they can figure it out and if they can work. And with what we know about relationship science and the data of like how do we rebuild devastated relationships and marriages, I tell clients like if you have commitment, if you both are, you know, damned to make sure that you want to figure this out, it can work to a degree, of course. And I say that in the sense of if you're really resolved, if you are absolutely like, this is my person, I am for sure as shit, I'm not going anywhere, and we're going to go through hell and high water to figure this out, then you have a shot. You can make it. Through the work of doing therapy and kind of reflecting, you might realize that maybe I actually don't want this to work because I realize that I have to sacrifice myself to get, to meet my person's needs or vice versa. And that just means that, do you really want it? Because I don't think any of us really want a relationship where one person has to shrink themselves and compromise themselves to receive love. That again, that's not a really strong relationship. It's not a fulfilling relationship because one person has to exist less, to be in it. And that's not kind, that's not compassionate, that's not the empathy that, the movie magic kind of relationships encourage and we all aspire to. We all want deep, fulfilling, incredibly embodied love. And if you're in a space where that's not coming at your detriment, that's not coming at your partner's detriment, and you're committed to figuring this out, at your core, this is your person and vice versa, you have a shot. I promise.
Wow. Thank you so much. That's really powerful. I love the work that you do. I think that every single person deserves to feel loved, deserves to feel accepted for where they're at. And I think that every single person deserves to be respected. And I'm absolutely so fond of, a lot of the stuff that you talked about. I feel like it is so important to bring this message out there. To the listeners that want to connect with you, Marcus, what's the best way for them to stay connected, especially with the Realist and the brand that you have built on the belief that good mental health content doesn't have to be watered down or dressed up? Where can people find you?
I'm on most social platforms. I post pretty consistently on like Instagram, TikTok. My handle's the same on basically all of them at the Realist Therapist. I'm starting to create more long form content like this on my podcast. And so on most of my channels, if you go to them, you'll find my link, you'll find all my content there.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And to the listeners, thank you again for tuning in to another episode of the Inspired to Thrive and Shine podcast. If you found this valuable, please, whatever you do, don't just leave it here. Share it with your friends and your family. Tag someone that needs to hear this conversation, or, it would be the cherry on top if you would leave a review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. And I'm looking forward bringing to you guys more episodes like this in the future. And Marcus, once again, thank you so much for just such a raw, real, and vulnerable conversation. I love the passion that you bring. I love the knowledge and the expertise that you bring as well. And yeah, I'm grateful to have you on the show.
Thank you so much. I just want to say, like, even in our brief conversation, I can tell that you really do have like that compassionate heart as well. That you deserve people deserve to feel loved, and that means a lot for me because I don't like getting wrapped up in the pettiness and kind of like being bitter. And I can tell that you really stand for like letting love win, and that means a lot for me. And so I just want to even kind of give you that shout out to your audience of like I can feel that and I can see that in our conversations, and like you deserve that praise. So thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Marcus. I really appreciate it. So thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you inspired to thrive.